where it was quiet, but walking one more block you could come out onto the main avenue, which was very busy. The brother director had belonged to the GFU since the time of Maestro Estrada's life, and at that time he was looking for new ideas, starting a small business on the school Americo Living Trail 90 property and thus earning extra income to benefit the mission. But like most of us, he was not exempt from ego, and from being a sort of chosen one in the hierarchy within the GFU. In particular, the brother director proclaimed to the Four Winds that Maestro Estrada had appointed him universal manager of all the schools for Nazarene children that might ever exist. Such was the sacredness of his mission and the religious nature of his path. By the way, it is well known that Maestro Estrada suggested that we have faith in him, but it was always with wisdom, not blind faith as it was often understood. Many children lived in the school for the entire week, so bathing some 50 children, feeding them, making sure they went to sleep, and all of this was a real ordeal. Especially since several of them were becoming teenagers. It was interesting to see how the hired women, assisted by the teachers, prepared the food, and worked hard, for the sake of the great ideal. Another of the GFU brothers lived there with his wife, who was a teacher, and his children as students. This brother was a university student, and had been a Buddhist, since he was 7. He was very quiet, but when he spoke, there was much to learn from him. Excited by the situation, I offered to partner with the director and offer him good prices, to install an air conditioning system in the area, designated for the bread oven, which was quite large. I told him I would make the bread and he promised to find a way to sell it. I also taught him how to make vegetarian chicharron and things like that. I went to my dad's workshop, and, with minimal money, I practically gave him the air conditioning system, so the place would operate according to the health department's requirements. The bread started to come out, but my friend, under one pretext or another, wasn't going to sell it forever. His cancer personality dominated his domestic behavior, and he wanted to spend a lot of time with the school children, although, ironically, he actually neglected his own children, and was often unaware of their awakening sexuality. All of this was discussed behind his back. My boss had recently had a problem with his former school administrator. He was a business graduate whom I knew and respected because he'd once brought me to Ixtapa to be the official baker for the ovens at a beachside hotel. But the director of Quinto Sol fired him because he claimed he was doing nothing and was keeping him for nothing, trying to make things work better, and lacking political and speculative skill, as well as general experience. When I saw that the director wasn't making our venture prosper, I suggested we make bread, and that some of the women who cleaned the school go sell it in the surrounding area. The cleaning ladies were enthusiastic about the idea, perhaps excited by the desire to escape from domestic confinement. So I started making bread, and they went Americo Living Trail 91 out with their baskets, and knocked on doors, and after a few hours they returned with their mission accomplished. All the bread was sold. I suspect the director was jealous, afraid of losing power, or perhaps diminishing a foolish popular charisma he felt he had. The fact is, that the director didn't want to make himself known to the local people in this way, that is, as a social project for needy children. Perhaps this was what embarrassed him. The fact is, that one day the director stated that it was not right to do business this way, and that we should therefore stop selling bread on the street. One day I was having a sort of small meeting with the 3 or 4 people who were supposed to be my staff. The director came into the room, as if he were at home, and sat down to listen to what I was saying. Then I said to him, "Brother, excuse me, but you can't hear this, so please leave, and as soon as we need you, I'll call you." "Thank you." He blushed a little, then tried to smile so as not to be affected, and, nodding his head in a forced sign of approval, he left. The workers were pleasantly surprised, as they often criticized the director behind the scenes, pointing out his shortcomings, but no one had spoken out against the director's brother's unstable demeanor. His wife loved him blindly, and, knowing his flaws, endured them, tolerated his emotional imbalance, and his blind fanaticism for Maestro Estrada. In reality, his wife was a very intelligent and valuable person, but she behaved like the director's unconditional supporter, and if the director went down the drain, she would go with him without having to eat, and my baker friend. Not many days later, one afternoon the director plucked up his courage, and told me that he was not going to keep me like the administrator who had been with him before, so from then on there would be no food for me. As I saw that my children and my partner would still have food available, I simply responded almost happily. Alright. His wife may have considered this attitude very wise, or perhaps she didn't understand anything, so she remained silent, obeying her husband's order. For my part, I felt he was a stubborn and square person, like a taskmaster from 2 centuries ago. Americo Living Trail 92. But God doesn't forget me. As soon as I showed up at the GFU, I was lucky enough to find a friend who lived nearby making bread, and invited me to join him. So my family lived at Quinto Sol School, and I went out to work with this brother who lived nearby. As he was starting his business, he paid me with bread and sometimes let me use his small car that he had. His wife liked to flirt with me. She was a skinny, short girl with a bubbly personality, and she also ran a small school for children. But I was only interested in her as a friend, and above all, I respected my friend. My unusual partner wanted me to continue with him on the adventure of, over the years, starting his bakery, but for now, he offered me nothing but promises. I couldn't tell my children to stop eating for so long, or my spirit to stop growing. Something higher was always calling me, and I trusted. When I saw that progress had stopped with my friend, I started scheduling my visits with him. Years later, he sent me a greeting from the coast of Cancun. He already had a large bakery, and was doing very well, but his wife was sleeping with other people. Of course, I never knew he was aware of the affair. Actually, I was interested in making money, but it wasn't my priority, because at the same time I needed to discover the truth, to know who I am, what I'm doing here, and where I'm going. I wasn't a good father, I couldn't be one, because I didn't know myself. However, those who approached me as a spiritual guide must have done so because, to them, I knew myself best. Ironically, though, these friends who sought me out as a teacher never openly acknowledged me as such, because I wasn't one, according to the rules of the GFU institution, which only recognizes a teacher by the cross periodically awarded to them. And even though I knew this was so, I didn't strive to follow the initiatory policy of speculation, in order to earn crosses in an institutional and legal climb that would grant me the rank of master. What mattered to me was finding my royal path, because when we are sincerely in love with wisdom, our being continues to grow inexorably. In a way, the first thing was to discover who I am, and survive however I could, and everything would be given to me as a bonus. Maybe I didn't do it in the best way, but there wasn't even time to wonder. I've always lived in the very moment of emergency, studying the teachings of Master Estrada and end of the work at the Quinto Sol School. Americo Living Trail 93. So, I wasn't making any steady money from my friend, and since I wasn't neglecting the odd job he offered me, I had plenty of time, as always. So I picked up the thick book called My Communications, where Maestro Estrada gave all his concentrated teachings, especially his famous orientation communications. In the morning I left Quinto Sol, and went to the library next to the rector's office at UNAM, and there I began to read paragraph by paragraph and line by line all of Maestro Estrada's teachings, until I knew what his message was in his important mission. Every day I saw more clearly this kind of retreat against the current that continued its march within me and never stopped. When the weekend came, we had to return with our children to the house in Netzahualcoyotl, but the director wasn't bothered by what we would eat that weekend. This wasn't on his radar, so we would get up very early on Saturdays, while they were still asleep. He would go into the bakery and the kitchen and steal what he needed, trying not to make it obvious. Surely, over time, they would realize what was happening, but they remained silent, and tried to be brotherly about the situation. At that time, Maestro Marcelli had told us not to have any more children, since we already had 2. My partner had gone to a social health center where they inserted the diaphragm into her womb, so she wouldn't have any more babies, but one afternoon her body rejected it, and due to lack of money, haste, and even irresponsibility, she didn't go and get it inserted again. As time passed, she would become pregnant again, and the other 2 children, twins, would be born. Continuing at Quinto Sol School, the surprises continued. Around this time, my maternal family told me that one of them had seen my classmate with a man, hugging each other, boarding a bus. She saw his relative, and asked him to please keep quiet. But he was shocked, and immediately went to tell his wife, and then everyone in the family knew. They told me, but I kept quiet, and continued to defend her. I insisted on reaching an end to all this, but now I didn't know if there was an end, or if it would be the right one. After more than 6 months, the business with the Quinto Sol school finally ended. The teacher servant who worked tirelessly at this school full-time, and whose husband was a Buddhist, both belonged to the LGFU, also exhausted her strength in this unequal struggle against the brother director's ways, and ended up not being able to bear the situation any longer. She spoke with me. I guided her with an astrological consultation, explaining a little about her life, and then she was lucky enough to have someone set up a small boarding school for her on the outskirts of the city called Oro, in Michoacan. When she managed to stabilize, she would occasionally invite me there, to spend the day or night tutoring her children, but the pay she gave me was paltry. She did it with good intentions, but the results weren't the same. Americo Living Trail 94. Sometimes, when I went to the boarding school run by the brothers who had also left the Quinto Sol school, I liked to get off at the little town called Oro, and walk from there to the school of the sister who was waiting for me. She learned to love me in a friendly way, and when I hinted at something more than friendship, she would subtly ask me about my partner. I wasn't really that attracted to the sister, so it was easy for me to accept her, and come to love her as a good friend. His partner was also a little crazy in a positive sense. I remember that, when I visited them, I felt so good, like I was on a mission. Especially when, after teaching yoga to the children there, the sister offered me a bed to sleep in, a nice place with clean sheets. One night, my Buddhist friend, who was also a Jagnian at the GFU, came over and began telling me about his adventures. As a university professor, he'd been awarded a scholarship to visit several European countries. On his way back, he made a stopover at the southern border of Mexico, and in almost ridiculous and accidental circumstances, he was given drugs, and then a corrupt police officer arrived and bought them. That's how, from one moment to the next, he had money, almost without realizing it. He also told me that he had crossed a part of the jungle in Chiapas, and once, when he couldn't reach the jump due to a very steep place, he was about to fall, but then an invisible hand pushed him towards the edge, so that he could reach the rock, where he clung, and thus, he was saved. Later, when he was back home in El Oro, he had to travel to Mexico on a foreign truck, but once the vehicle was involved in an accident and overturned. More than 20 people died, but he clung to the seat in front of him, and that saved his life, as the truck flipped several times. Many miraculous things happened to this brother, and I realized that something higher was protecting him. A more mature disciple. Around this time, another friend appeared in my life who wanted to learn things from me. He also belonged to the fraternity, and wasn't as young as the Mason who had traded me for the initiator. In fact, he already had a stable job, and although he didn't earn much, he had grown accustomed to its way of life. He was about 27, when he became interested in what I could teach him. Americo Living Trail 95. He and his girlfriend would meet at a friend's house from the Lajif University at Granada, so I could give them a special family lesson. They were amazed when I spoke to them about the origin of the universe and things like that. Of course, I primarily approached the subject at a philosophical level, because I don't consider myself wise like my masters, like the ascended ones, or even like a simple professor of astronomy or anything similar. My wisdom came from a combination of what I experienced, and what I thought, with elementary but scientific formulas. This friend wouldn't let go of me, and was a kind of disciple, and soon after he married his girlfriend. There were happy moments in our relationship. For example, once, in her car, they took us, and the children to a picnic at a beach resort on the outskirts of the city. I remember we ate a lot of veggie burgers. He was the one who gave us the 2 cribs and onesies for the last 2 children. It was a deal that lasted nearly 3 years, until they moved to the provinces in search of better horizons. The Nayaric jungle and the missionaries' deliria. The person who years before had given shelter to the woman, who would become the mother of my children, and who later brought her to my house, came to visit me, this time with the news that she had already sold her house for what seemed to me to be a ridiculously low price. My friend's partner was also a member of the GFU, and liked to hang out with the ladies who occasionally attended yoga classes at her house, and it seems my friend didn't notice. Later, I concluded that she didn't really want to notice so as not to lose her partner. The news was that he wanted us to go to Tepic, Nayarit. My partner was annoyed by the haste with which she wanted us to leave, especially since the direct invitation was not to my partner, but to me. But given the circumstances, he had no choice but to accept that I go alone with these friends to try to explore the possibility of moving there. These brothers were definitely idealists, because just like that, they had thrown their house away, and, without having confirmed where they intended to settle, were now homeless with only a few pesos in their pockets. It was impossible to buy another house in Tepic with their money. Their idea was much more foolish than I would have thought. They intended to go to the homes of the best hierarchs of the solar GFU there and immediately have my friend's companion recognized as a grandmaster, so that everything would be offered to him, as it were, on a silver platter. Americo Living Trail 96. We arrived with these hierarchical brothers, future lovers of our incredible power or stupidity. They looked at us like freaks. After this in-depth analysis, they rudely realized we were a little crazy, but that the good manners of the fraternity prevented us from expressing it. So, for that night, they offered us a place to stay on their property. We gladly accepted. The next day, my friends were hesitant about whether or not to check out the coast in Puerto Vallarta, which was a few miles from Tepic. I realized that the money wasn't that tight anyway, so since they were hesitant but eager, I said, "We have to have a good time, and try our luck at the same time." They accepted and considered my decision somewhat daring. We were happy by the sea. These brothers appreciated me, but they couldn't really help me, nor could I help them. When we returned from the coast in Puerto Vallarta, my friend secretly told me that the brothers who had forced us to use their house had robbed us. When my friend went through his things, he found no valuable books, like the one titled Cosmic Fire, written by the Tibetan, which he planned to sell to help us with the travel costs. Evidently the brothers who had apparently offered us their home had robbed us, while we were gone for just a day, but due to the circumstances, we had to act as if nothing had happened. My friend was so excited, that she was desperate to bring all her things, and move to Tepic, Nayarit. So, as soon as we arrived in Nayarit, we went to visit the person she recommended to sell us some land. He was a brother who liked living in the jungle of Nayarit. He was another dreamer who, no matter what, had the idea of founding an ashram for the GFU in that area, where there were still vipers, packs of wild animals and other specimens typical of a forest. It was extremely hot when we visited the brother, and the river was completely dry. He explained to us that the water flow would be enormous when the season arrived. Trying to be friendly, the brother offered to take us around the area. So, we walked for several hours along the large, waterless river channel. After more than 2 hours, we arrived at a kind of spring pool formed by natural water, with a unique landscape in view. He said, "Feel nature, cool off a little." I took it very seriously, because I immediately took off all my clothes, including my underwear, to really experience nature. And without any shame, I went into the water. My friend was just as surprised by how naturally I acted. In reality, it was a place where it was possible to experience in a special way the contact with the jungle and nature. Americo Living Trail 97. My friend later told me that she admired me even more for my natural way of behaving on that occasion. That day, the brother showed us a small house that we could live in if we decided to come and live here, but for that, we first had to arrange some paperwork with Guru Marcelli's son, whose interests were also involved in the area planned for the future GFU ashram in Nayarit. This was a little strange. The brother wasn't clear, and kept telling us to wait. But my friends couldn't wait any longer. Finally we had to return to Mexico City, between sad and happy. My friend had practically rented out the house, and they had nothing. I don't know exactly how she managed, but I only knew she worked making vegetarian food and similar services. A few days after arriving from Nayarit, we tried to contact Maestro Marcelli's son in Mexico City, and the result was that we had to attend a meeting proposed by the Supreme Council of the GFU Solar Line. The meeting place would be at the world headquarters on Eugenia Avenue. We arrived and it seemed to me that everyone on the council was very serious, while Maestro Marcelli's son was smiling and positive about the situation of his brother from Nayarit. Nayarit's brother didn't show up for the interview. The council members said it was obvious he was acting in such a manner, since he was trying to appropriate the land in Nayarit, even though the Guru Marcelli's son also had ownership documents for the site. Maestro Marcelli's son was tolerant and confident about his situation. But the fact was that nothing could be done for us since the dispute over the land continued. This door was closing, and my idealistic friends and I were suffering the consequences. We each had to try to survive however we could, but friendship takes its own course, and we never know when people or groups will reunite. I had already helped her in the past, so that her husband would respect her a little more, which is why I allowed her to live in my house, hidden from my friend. I gave her my humble room, and we managed to teach my partner a lesson, so he would tell her where she was, and I finally did. Then they had a beautiful baby girl they didn't know how to care for, and I told them to give her to me. They were actually close to doing it, but it didn't work out. With the loss of his home, and my friend's personality, our relationship as a couple became even more unsustainable. Americo Living Trail 98 Awakening energy and to humanities on one planet. I couldn't become a human machine, much less a machine initiate. I had proven it, and because of that, I was simply left alone. I didn't fully understand it, but I realized that as one enters a discipline where the endocrine glands seek their balance and we begin to have the capacity to feel happy, unusual challenges are also unleashed in our destiny. Love couldn't force it, even though it tried. That's why I began to understand the brothers of the fraternity in a different and quite original way. As they begin to advance within an initiatic hierarchy, instead of moving forward, they seem to begin to regress, starting to commit morally or physically horrible errors. Perhaps because they are beginning to participate in what humanity truly is on the planet and what it has inherited over millions of years of evolution. When we practice disciplines that transmute physical energies into psychic ones, as is the case with the practice of Hatha Yoga, what is basically awakened is sexual energy, and, logically, passion is unleashed in a beautiful way. However, at the same time, many temptations arise, because this energy cannot stay here, it has to go somewhere, and if we lack direction and courage, then that same energy tends to turn against us. I couldn't understand how it is that not all humans are equal, if in the eyes of God we are. I was still very lukewarm, and wanted to treat everyone, and especially women, the same. Add to this that as we grow in our desire to be better, we often begin to believe that we already have complete mastery of everything, and, therefore, control over ourselves, when we are just getting to know ourselves. Indeed, I was beginning to confront two different natures within which humanity develops. These are two mixed humanities. One corresponds to humanity's biological genetics, and the other to its celestial genetics. I hadn't yet understood that the collective unconscious is an experiment that simply responds to a mechanical humanity, created to be exploited, and that they are called, in esoteric jargon, human beings without mental spheres. While those who develop their individuality enjoy mental spheres, and have the capacity for consciousness. Thus, we were not all equal. Americo Living Trail 99 People who lack individuality, and are very attached to the biological are not the same as those who are attached to cosmic reality. In this sense, it's not right to give everyone our support and love, at least not in the same way. And this erroneous attitude is worse, if we act this way, not because it essentially makes us happy, but because we care about the opinions of others, our family, and mainly because it fills us with a strange pride, based on our egotism. Happiness is not something forced, especially when someone insists on usurping the place of others. This weakness for certain types of people who enter our lives was especially noticeable in my dealings with the feminine. For example, when I had recently entered Airport High School, and tried to defend a student from an unwelcome suitor, it caused her sister to become enthusiastic about me from then on, and I didn't dare disappoint her. So instead of helping her, I hurt her even more, to the point that she sought every subtle way to attract me, but in reality, I didn't love her, or even desire her. This is an example of how, even if instinctively, we all have certain principles or ways of life, and there are many times when we should not directly help those we shouldn't, if we don't want to pay unaffordable prices, that may include our own lives, which, in any case, we can give up in installments or all at once. Certainly, some conscious people imitate the unconscious, and many unconscious people imitate the conscious, but whatever we do, no one can stop being what they are. looking for a job. After a GFU brother, who held the key position in the ISSSTE union, had helped us get care at one of the hospitals in the south of the city for the birth of my first child, and given my situation, the idea occurred to me was to visit him, and try to get me a good job, at least a stable one. But friends aren't always what they seem, or perhaps our destiny isn't what we want it to be. Especially when there's a cosmic plan directing us, ever more directly. After several attempts in my life in this regard, I came to the categorical conclusion that a job within an official institution was not for me. Since I was born, I never had a schedule. Instead, my father, working on his own, would offer his clients the time and day their orders would be delivered. Even before meeting my partner, I had some remarkable experiences in this regard. During my fast-paced adolescence, one day I argued with my father, who was blocking our personal progress due to fleeting bouts of jealousy and petty selfishness. So I went looking for a job. I tried with an engineer for whom we had previously done work in my father's small workshop. I chose him thinking he would respect me for this, but in reality, he offered me a Americo Living Trail 100 low-level salary. I only lasted one day working as an employee. It was ridiculous to accept earning in 2 months what my father and I had previously earned in 4 days, when we did work for that same engineer. I remember thanking the engineer's son, the person just a few years older than me, and he said to me very seriously, "It's okay, you can go, but I just want to tell you one thing, in the end, you're going to have to give in. You won't be able to live without holding on." However, that same day, when I left there, I looked at the people and places, feeling like the freest man in the world. Maybe I wasn't cut out to work in a galley, or maybe the engineer's son was right. Shortly after, when I had just graduated from high school, I tried to get a job at UNAM because my brother-in-law, divorced from the daughter of a prominent Mexican politician, before meeting my sister, was a person who had good connections, and being a teacher at the school, where I had studied high school, in addition to all his popularity as a student politician, he recommended me in the employment area at UNAM. But despite everything, I found that everyone was fighting for positions in a dishonest manner, so on that occasion, even with my good disposition, it was not possible to get me a stable job. For this reason, it was a big deal that, motivated by the birth of my first child, I was willing to compromise, seeing that it was my own family who needed the money. When I became a father, I even reached the point where I tried to contact more than one person from the ISSSTE union, hoping they would help me get a job at this institution, even as an assistant or part of the cleaning staff. I was willing to do anything. And so, while I was already at Jegnian High School, I met a friend who was a member of the ISSSTE union, and in charge of reviewing the requirements of all applicants for positions within the institution. I was absolutely sure he would accept me. That time I arrived at the appointment, my friend from the GFU, the husband of Maestro Estrada's niece or goddaughter, was also there. He was a very nice person, we were really friends. This friendship grew stronger from the day another friend took me to the offices where he worked as a design and drafting technician. That time, the reason for my visit was to buy me some bread, and encourage his colleagues to do the same, and that's what happened. This person who had taken me to my friends, that day had also done things for me, having already helped me get permission to sell bread at the Higher School of Physical Education, where he was about to graduate. I could have stayed there as a whole grain bread vendor, but my status as a street vendor was highly controversial, and besides, my need to remain attached to the GFU required a significant amount of my attention and time. So when I arrived with the brothers from the ISSSTE union, and I found my friend waiting in line to speak with the union members, after greeting him I asked him, "Americo Living Trail 101, what are you doing here?" "Same as you, I'm looking for a job," he replied. I realized that I had actually been influenced to just leave my safe job and set out to seek new horizons. While we chatted and waited to be served, he continued drawing a comic strip of esoteric teachings on some paper, with caricature drawings. As time went by, my friend was going to leave him for another man who had delusions of grandeur, and claimed to be chosen for a post-Aquarius era. This is what I learned. I never saw my friend again, because after this disappointment in love he felt so sad that he went to live in the province with a young girl. Anyway, when I went to visit the boss who was going to give me a job at ISSSDE, I ran into someone who at the time had earned a Jetschul's novice degree at the GFU. He also worked in this office, and had made his home after 20 years of uninterrupted service to this institution. He gave me some advice. It's not that I don't want you to work here, but you're still young, and it really isn't in your best interest to sell your life to an institution. Take care of what's most precious to you, which is your own freedom. If I were in your situation, and could choose again, I'd rather keep my freedom, than be a person without a choice. I listened attentively, as the idea wasn't foreign to me, but I still completed the necessary paperwork to work at ISSSDE. Days passed, and the GFU brother in charge of assigning jobs at that institution went around the issue so much that he became dizzy. Something similar happened to most of the brothers who approached him. I thought maybe he didn't like me, so I spoke to my colleague about it. She told me she'd try her luck. She went to visit him, and started the job application process, but one afternoon I was surprised to find that his brother wouldn't complete the application, and she explained why. His brother told him that things were not going to be so easy because he had suffered a lot to win the position he held, and he was not going to allow anyone to come to work without suffering what he had. Here my dreams of entering this type of work ended. With experience, I've become convinced that people generally refer to having people under their command as having a job. At least in the bureaucracy, this is what happens. When a company, large or small, cannot control a person, then it rejects them. Americo Living Trail 102. Every human being has the ability to adhere to a work schedule, but as they develop true freedom they tend to escape the power of being controlled, simply because they are no longer a machine, and are therefore capable of thinking for themselves, and making their own decisions. The Seamstresses Union and the good friend of the Freemasons. Since teaching classes every 10 or 15 days near the Oro village wasn't a success, driven by the need and desire to do things my way, I decided to go to the Union Hall across from the premises, where I had once set up my small bakery, in bad company with my friend. I arranged it, based on my horoscope, which indicated I had something to do with unions or something similar. So I ended up speaking directly to the manager and leader of this union. He was a mature, but still young man, and I told him I would like to give yoga classes to the workers you are in charge of, if you allow me. He looked at me, and we discussed a few things, and after half an hour he accepted. The deal was that I would earn money from a small contribution that I would ask the seamstresses for after each class. There wasn't enough space in the place, so when they finished their work schedule, we put the maquiladora machines aside. I did start my yoga classes with around 20 seamstresses. One of them, the one who felt most attractive, was willing to have sex with me. But I didn't like it, nor was I eager to be unfaithful to my partner. At that time, I was attending my session at Jagnian school, and I remember almost accidentally starting to joke with a sister who was about 15 years older than me. Between laughs and affection, I told her, "You're not ugly, you actually look good." "Very good." She also began to laugh along with the little game. Everything seemed like other times, since we belonged to the same Jagnian school and together we gave lectures at the world headquarters, Eugenia, to a more or less large audience, especially because the entire Jagnian school participated in the organization of this type of events. Americo Living Trail 103. After flirting with the sister, when we were at the GFU, and, in addition, she knew that I was teaching at a union, and said to me, "It would be nice if I came for you, and we could talk for a while." I found that incredible, mainly because I naively thought he was genuinely interested in my work, so I happily replied, "It would be nice if you visited me here, so you could see what I'm doing." This friend was the one who had allowed me to give some esoteric astrology and mythology sessions in her home, located within the Tlatelolco housing complex. My small audience, on those rare occasions, was made up of more or less intelligent people, as they were brothers, 30 or 40 Masons, not only from White Lodges, but also from others outside our GFU institution. When I gave my presentations, they were impressed by the practical applications of my general knowledge associated with astrology, in a way that was different from what they were used to. It was on one of these occasions that I ran into my former high school math teacher, who now happens to be a Freemason. After introducing myself, I reminded him that I had been his student at the school I attended, but that he had failed me in math. He replied, "The same thing happened to you as happened to Einstein, who failed math, but turned out to be a genius." Many of them were older than me, and were suitors of my friend, who had invited me to give them the talk. As was natural for me, I needed money, but when I agreed to give the talk to their guests, we hadn't agreed on anything specific. Fortunately, at the initiative of one of them, the special Masonic collection tray was circulated among the audience so everyone could contribute. A sum of money was collected, precisely related to the number 33, a highly symbolic figure in esotericism. This was the main reason I left the place happy. One day I was at the Seamstresses Union, I finished teaching, and my friend from the GFU showed up. She was very cheerful and friendlier than usual, as she started hugging me. She invited me to her house in Tlatelolco, and there she became even more affectionate. In reality, she was an enthusiastic student with Kabbalah and esotericism, which had allowed her to establish good relationships with the Freemasons, I don't know how good, and with the brothers of the ISSSTE Union. All of this was one of the reasons why I let her take me, as I wanted to associate with someone who could connect with me. But there was another reason, and that was that I was truly tired of the situation with my partner. I was reaching my limit in useless fidelity and a meaningless life, because by nature I love women as a universal and human principle. Americo Living Trail 104. My naughty friend took the initiative, and I had sex with the sister, or, rather, she had sex with me. She liked me, and always recognized me as someone who knew a lot. During the unusual conversation we had that afternoon, she let me know she had a priestess degree and other such things, I think mostly to impress me. Our intimate relationship didn't last very long, because there wasn't really a deep bond. However, since I didn't ejaculate, she admired me even more. My foolish attitude of always being a gentleman and always making the woman feel good had led me to get carried away. I couldn't tell the difference between a goddess and a mere woman. And that afternoon/evening, as she accompanied me to the metro station, she promised to help me, and for some reason we both understood that this sexual relationship would not happen again. To complete this tangle of passions and failures, things weren't going well in the Seamstresses Union, mainly because the local boss began to grow jealous of my nascent leadership, and also because the seamstresses lacked much culture. They spoke like chatterboxes, and giggled like fools, unable to truly engage with the new age message I was bringing them. So, as it were, I was left talking only about universal and initiatory wisdom, and finally, I had to give up on this endeavor. Playing the mom, my partner was desperate now, and considered me incompetent. If I could have said goodbye, I would have, but we weren't even married, and our main bond was the children. On the other hand, her attitude was beginning to allow me, in a unique way, to bring the truth to the surface, for example, that we never really felt anything for each other, but above all that the love she had for me was based mainly on a cold interest, sustained by the idea that I would become a teacher and she wanted to be present when that happened. To manage such an enterprise, I was surprised to realize that I myself, unconsciously, apart from many reasons, was actually not willing to make money enough to be tied to a relationship where she intended to have total control of my financial prosperity. Somehow I felt that I was not worthy, and that no matter how hard I tried, I would never be satisfied, because something in me could not be filled. We were still talking, and since I was always burdened with the housework anyway, I suggested we switch roles and she would go to work herself, while I stayed behind to take care of the children. She took courage from herself, measured the benefits of being freed from a domestic situation she hated, and told me she was fine. Americo Living Trail 105. He found a job as a kitchen assistant. He knew from her behavior that she wouldn't resist the temptations that were already dominating her. This is how I began to live another form of retirement, as I spent most of the day at home working on domestic chores. I liked to sit on the couch, after rushing to do the laundry and feed the children. They played in the yard of Netzahualcoyotl's house while I read. I would often hear a squeal from one of them. I would run in. I would comfort him, put him in order, and then the boy would go back to the playground to play. Meanwhile, I tried to study. This situation would last for about 4 months. It was the time when one of my young followers from the Yamine school liked to be with me in my poor house as much as he could, and sometimes the price was having to help me wash quite a few diapers, not very clean ones. Within a month, I noticed my colleague was very worried in the evenings, and, as always, I patronized her, asking her what was wrong. Then, as expected, she told me the story of the Reverend Gagpa, affiliate, who had fallen in love with her from the first time he saw her at her workplace. He let her know, and the next day he returned to visit her at work. According to his description, he was an incredible man. When he gave me this person's name, I recognized him. He was an architect, well-off, middle-class, married, and well into his middle years. The next day, she continued to tell me that she had left work and ran into him again, and according to her, he just hugged her. It was obvious she was trying to tell me something more when she said, "He just hugged me," but I was already used to her stories, so I never cared to check. I just said to him, "It's okay that he loves you, and if that's true, tell him to leave his wife and stay with you. I'll give you my permission, and I'll step aside, so you can be okay with him, with or without the kids." He didn't know what to answer, because evidently that brother wasn't going to leave his family and social status for a simple spiritual sister. Later, the Reverend brother attended the headquarters and other GFU sites with his real wife. According to her version, he had to give up the woman he'd fallen in love with, my companion, because his duty as a husband held him back. For my part, I was beginning to mature and take off the blindfold, finally, so much so that I didn't understand what they saw in this woman, because I was already really getting Americo Living Trail 106. To know her at a very high price, and in reality she wasn't pretty in appearance, but what was happening was that she was tremendously deceptive in her mystical attitude. After a few more weeks, physical fatigue and disillusionment made her resign from this workplace, and she found employment as a cook's assistant at the GFU national headquarters. Everyone in the middle continued to see us as an Aquarian family, but I already knew the truth about these types of situations, which I didn't agree with at all, but I didn't know which direction to take. I wanted a divine sign that would move me to try my path again. Sometimes she and I were invited to give a talk at the national headquarters about the Aquarian family, and I was still excited about the topic. Sparkles of passion. At that time, I had met a woman who had founded a new yoga center for the institution. Once at the Kotapek ashram, she asked me to draw her birth chart, because she was having difficult problems with her husband, and so I did. I told her that her problem was primarily that she wasn't sexually satisfied in her relationship with her husband, since her Scorpio temperament made her very passionate. She was surprised, and said it was true. I didn't see her for a few days, and when I saw her again, I was about to enter her class at the pre-initiation school. She hugged me, and because of the situation I was experiencing, I reciprocated with a passionate kiss. This happened again, when I happened to bump into her again. There was no sex, because as the days went by, she came around, and realized we both had our own families. So she chose to distance herself, and I didn't really love her, it was just desire, so I didn't make any attempt to pursue her. Astrology office, a lost village, the road to Deluca, and the apprentice announcer. I knew a Jagnian engineer whom I considered a true astrologer. He had grown tired of being locked away working as a bureaucrat, and had partnered with another, also a fairly well-known astrologer. When I heard about the affair, I felt renewed hope. I called my engineer friend, and told him I wanted to join them as well. The next day I got the answer, I'd been accepted. Americo Living Trail 107. I had an appointment with them, and discovered they already had an office near Eugenia's high school. From the beginning, we tried to do horoscope birth charts as a kind of professional depth psychology service. My friend created several natal charts of famous Mexican artists as sample formats for our work. The other astrologer was busy finishing several ballads of 12 songs, each referring to a zodiac sign. It was a respectable undertaking. For my part, I wrote a poetic drama about the 12 signs that we titled Eros, Planetary Fantasy, as well as brochures for young couples, etc. We managed to make several horoscope charts, and the plan was to break into the artistic world to provide consulting services, since our astrologer friend, who wasn't a member of the GFU, had demonstrated a knack for singing and playing the guitar. In fact, he had already given a few concerts, and worked on television in the province. This astrologer, however, was a man who had left his wife with a child, and who now dedicated himself to helping especially female clients, good-looking women, including, free of charge, and as a fundamental part of the therapy, having sexual relations with them, whenever possible. The person renting this place to us did so almost rent-free. He was a Frenchman who looked to be about 60 years old, and had a young woman of about 18 as his lover. Our singing astrologer partner didn't waste any time, and had sex with her as soon as he could. The young lady was out of control, and I wasn't really interested when she tried to get close to me in some way. Despite everything, this partnership gave me some enjoyable moments, because I was doing what I truly love. I learned a lot more about astrology, and gained much greater self-confidence. My partner was distraught. Perhaps it was my optimism about what I was doing, perhaps poverty, or jealousy. The fact is, she contacted the brothers from the Quinto Sol School. They had a place that was like lost land in Toluca. There were some very rustic rooms there, and the place was practically far from any city. The town was very small and isolated, to the point that the most visible thing was the only small store in the very humble place. The Sol director's dream law school at Quinto was to establish a boarding school for Nazarene children there. In fact, he had already attempted this some time ago. My partner arranged the paperwork, and the members of the Quinto Sol school accepted her to live there. She took the children, who were still very young. For my part, I supported her in every way. My astrologer friend, who was a member of the GFU, encouraged me a lot, and gave me the strength to keep going. But I still saw many shortcomings in this partner due to his need to manipulate society to his advantage. Americo Living Trail 108. I visited the children whenever I could, which was usually every month. My astrologer friend had a little more money, as his parents had provided him with an apartment in the aforementioned Portales neighborhood, so he could live there with his wife, also a member of the GFU. Once again, I was experiencing the kind of retreat. I was overjoyed when my astrologer friend, stretching his budget a bit, invited me to a restaurant for lunch. One day his wife went on vacation, and he invited me to stay at his house. I gladly did so, and we shared a good and timely friendship for a while. I continued to learn a lot about astrology, and how strange some friendships can be. I remember that I used to sleep on the floor so as not to disturb him, and preferred to sleep in the living room. But one day he took pity on me, and told me we would share the same bed. I did, and as dawn was approaching, he quickly got up, and went to the kitchen to drink more than a liter of water, because his throat was dry. And between his coughs, occasionally raising his voice, he confessed to me that I had too much energy, and that this had had this effect on him, which he himself couldn't understand. I recognized that he was being sincere, so from then on I decided to continue sleeping on his living room rug. Years later, this friend was going to become paralyzed, but thanks to the development of an outstanding will, he was going to be cured and walk again, even though the doctors disagreed. When I saw him again, as I say, after years, I realized that his marriage was over, and now he was accompanied by another partner, who already had children. But back to our story. For now, I was doing what I loved. However, things at our astrological practice weren't making any money, and I realized firsthand that, in truth, people in general have a completely negative view of astrology. So, slowly, and unbearably, we had to leave our practice, but my friend insisted we wouldn't give up. He picked up the phone, and called an old acquaintance who owned a radio station in San Martin, Puebla. Every weekend, we would go to the radio station there, and speak for 1 to 2 hours to the people of Puebla through the station. My friend treated me very badly, in a painfully sincere way, to the point of calling me stupid, an idiot, and things like that, genuinely desperate because people were listening all over this region and I wasn't a more or less acceptable announcer. Simply because I didn't know how to speak into a microphone and there wasn't time to waste this opportunity. That's how I had to lose my fear and concentrate in order to do it more or less better. And I did. Although in the future, I would return to being humble, in order to perfect myself to the point of becoming an acceptable, mobile announcer, forged by the march of life itself. But aside from these incidents, we appreciated each other. This is why, on the way from San Martin to Mexico City, we spent pleasant moments discussing esotericism and astrology, as well as gossip about our friends. But one day, as we were returning from the town to Mexico City, it began to rain unusually hard. The road was invisible because it had Americo Living Trail 109 disappeared under a great torrent of water and mud. For a moment, we thought the water would get inside the car. We continued very slowly, as the car had become a canoe. He said to me very seriously, "This is a symbol of what we are facing, when we try to teach people everything we know." I thought he was right because I was also experiencing it firsthand. I loved this friend very much, and saw that behind his impregnable, moth-eaten priest-like shell, there was a very loving person toward my children. I appreciated him, but I was still aware that he would never accept being less than me. The situation wasn't productive, even though we were reaching a large audience over the radio. So he started insisting that I go to San Martin alone. I did so for a few weeks, but it couldn't go on forever, and one day it ended. When I arrived in Toluca to see my companion, she generally received me unkindly. They were accompanied by a family, a brother who belonged to the movement called Kundalini Yoga. He also had yogic tendencies, dressed in white, and had long hair, which he styled when hidden under a turban. And for reasons similar to mine, he regularly visited his wife and children. They were kind-hearted people, but as full of fantasies for a new humanity as we were, who had also been uprooted from society. My partner was beginning to express her sexual aversion toward me more and more openly, and that made me sad. In reality, I wasn't really interested in her in matters of love anymore. What I could but control was the knowledge that she needed sex and affection, and wasn't getting it. One day, I brought the two children to Netzahualcoyotl, since the twins hadn't been born yet, and I had no idea that something like this would happen to me later. And, that time, when we were returning to the remote village in Toluca, it was already a little late. We got off the truck right on the highway, and had to walk together 3 kilometers to reach the place where my partner and our friends lived. I was carrying one child in my arms and the other on foot, but when I made my first attempt to walk down the road, I discovered that it was completely and absolutely pitch black. I couldn't even see my own feet. All of this was a terrifying symbol of what I was experiencing. The darkness was total. Luckily I had noticed that some people got off before us, and I shouted to them, "Please, can someone help us, because I can't see anything." After a few anxious moments I heard his reply, "Wait, I think someone is talking to us. We have to help those people," said the woman who I later found out was her son. They came back for us, and by putting my hand on their shoulder, I was able to follow their steps. These peasants could see in the dark. Americo Living Trail 110. So we advanced for 3 kilometers, while thanking God for his mercy. The dirt road ran through the place I recognized, although I could barely see much of it. They asked me the names of my companion and the people who lived there, then began shouting at them. After 10 minutes, I heard a distant reply. It was my yogi friend coming to meet us. I later learned that in this place, it was easy for people to love each other deeply, but also to hate each other. Someone could kill someone else and everyone would find out, without the official justice system ever finding out. I was realizing I had to get out of this terrible darkness. I was reaching rock bottom in my relationship with this person, and in my own life. As a few months passed, the situation in Toluca was going to become unsustainable, so my partner had to return to our old house in Netzahualcoyotl, but it would only be for a short time. As for my work, I began to distance myself from my astrologer friend, and also became seriously disillusioned with my dreams of becoming an astrological consultant. The dreamed love. At this time, Jagni and school continued to hold fundraising events. Also a few months ago, we had gone to the Kotipek ashram. I remember that on that occasion, I asked a very reverend Jelling for advice about what I should do with my relationship, and he told me that it was important to be intelligent and sustain ourselves in love. That didn't help me much, but I understand that this brother really couldn't experience what I was already experiencing. Everything was indicating to me that I would have to make my own decisions, and in general, the people around me wouldn't understand. The need for a woman who could make me happy hadn't been met by my traveling companion, and I began to realize this while visiting the ashram in Coatepec, Veracruz. On one occasion, while I was at the small shrine in Coatepec, where I had received Master Estrada's blessing, when he was still in the physical body, our instructor and director of the Jagnian school brought us together. She was about 30 years old, and had had some life experiences, especially with relationships. That day, he decided to give us some group therapy. We were paired up, a man and a woman. First, the women had to blindfold the men, then the woman put her arm around his shoulder, helping him walk, while he began to talk about his life, about things that came from his heart. Later, it would be their turn, to be blindfolded and led by the man. Americo Living Trail 111. The joke was, that the listener shouldn't speak. So we did, and I was paired with a well-groomed and attractive lady despite her age. When it was my turn to lead her, I did so with great affection. I hugged her, and helped her walk, and she began to confess deep feelings she had experienced in her life. Little by little, she felt completely enveloped in me, and her sense of being loved grew so much, that she was on the verge of